So welcome back to another episode of Radio Free Fresno, one of the few podcasts coming to you from the south of Shaw. With us today is Dr. Lars Maischak, and he will be discussing a topic that is relatable to the both of us. Basically, when race and class don't intersect, or specifically when neoliberals are used for their identity in order to advance a specific agenda that is either capitalistic or enabling a fascism.
Hi, Maya. Then let's talk about this. I think the reason we came to discuss the topic was because we both were thinking about the phenomenon of Dr. Joseph Castro, who is now, to much applause from liberals and conservatives in this area, advancing from being president of Fresno State to being chancellor, which is to say the head honcho of the CSU system at large down in Long Beach. So he'll be running all the CSUs. And I think that is a scandal as far as I'm concerned. Joseph Castro, with his consistent policy of cheering on the right-wing targeted harassment, essentially this new McCarthyism against progressive and liberal faculty, especially at Fresno State, which is a hotbed of right-wing student activism, should have been fired in 2017 for his role in playing the, as I called it in the Fresno Bee, playing the role of parade marshal for the lynch mob. And I want to give a couple more details about why. Now, for the university system to say, well, we're going to leave him employed, and by the way, the same goes for the president, the current president of Bakersfield State, Lynette Zelezny, who was provost at Fresno State at the time in 2017, when Nazi activity in this town was especially high and dangerous. But it's not just that Castro, that the apparatchiks, that the bureaucrats, the neoliberal education bureaucrats in the CSU system apparently think that a man like Castro is a good fit to lead the system. But the union, the California Faculty Association, CFA, gave him a glowing recommendation when he was announced as the pick as chancellor, and said, we find it an inspiring choice. And the ground of the inspiration, although not openly stating, is that as a poor immigrant kid from the Central Valley, he rose with an education at Berkeley and whatnot to become a leader in these institutions. So,
in other words, he rose from nothing to become one of the elite.
Yes, absolutely. And apparently, if you are a liberal, then sight unseen, anybody with that background that predestines people more to be disadvantaged rather than not is a good thing, regardless of what else you stand for. So, and for me, if you're interested in human emancipation, if you're interested in equality and democracy, and therefore you're upset about the oppression of people on the grounds of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, and so forth, then that is your primary commitment. So if you have somebody who belongs to any oppressed group, but is in the business promoting inequality, of agitating against democracy, of giving a pass or encouraging people who are opposed to democracy and equality, that creates a problem. And so these liberals in the state of California, these union members, these faculty members who like Joseph Castro and who think there's nothing wrong with his politics and his actions as university president, apparently prioritize the outward marker of oppression, which is being an immigrant background from the Central Valley, of a working class background, to the substance of the political views of the person.
So I just like to interject with, it seems like there's two viewpoints. The ruling elite kind of see him as a token, and for us we kind of see him as what's called a vendido,
Mm-hmm.
which is a sellout, somebody
Mm-hmm.
who has basically given up their commitment to the community and to their roots, to their heritage, in favor of that tokenism, that privilege, being part of the elite, and the loyalties that come with that designation. So go ahead.
Yeah, no,
What do you think
that's
about
two different. That's two different ways of thinking about racial and ethnic justice and inclusion, right? There is the one that is essentially committed to achieving that within a capitalist system, and who might say that if you have, say, if there's 50% of the people in California who are not white, if you achieve 50% of CEOs, 50% of prison guards, 50% of cops, or whatever, being
Yeah.
non-white, then you've done the job.
Yeah,
Regardless.
it's the different foundation shades of oppression,
Yes,
if you will.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And in that sense, California is definitely a shining beacon of equality and diversity. But if you're interested in the substance of a democratic society where people can engage in debate, where you can have dissent, where you can advocate for radical change without being afraid for your life or job, and where you actually have a vision that you want a classless society, that you don't want people, the majority of the people, to be exploited to the bone in all these neoliberal schemes of managing people by stress, by deprivation, in the gig economy, that's different. And I would say that people who are actually saying we can fix oppression based on race and gender and ethnicity and whatnot within a capitalist framework are deluding themselves to the point where you might wonder whether they actually are interested in fixing oppression and inequality, because who historically has been at the bottom of the pecking order whenever you have an over-exploitative capitalist system? It has always been people of color. It has always been women. And it's, if you're a working class immigrant kid from the Central Valley, you're necessarily a vendido simply by making it. I think as long as we do.
Yeah, that is the it's vendido specifically means somebody who cuts off ties to the heritage and favors the oppressor ideology. That's what a vendido is. So somebody who acts like Guillermo Moreno, for example, would be one on the conservative side. Somebody who has cut off the community in favor of being a platform for Ben Bergquam and other fascists. And in doing so, he uses his background as a working class child of Democrat, lineage of immigrants, to say, I come from this background and yet I am a conservative. Therefore, like my words have more weight than anybody else's because of my background. So
he's at liberty to try that. The problem is for the liberals to let him get away with it.
Well, the same thing could be said for Castro's side, the neoliberal side. The same thing could be said for those people who do not call out the Castros, the Morenos, for
for the full context. It sounds kind of abstract. People might say, well, what's this guy done that gets you so worked up about him? So let me just fill in some of the blanks here, right?
Okay.
Because when the fascists came for me, because I had on Twitter developed an argument in 2017, going back to 2016, saying what Trump represents is fascism. It stands in the Twitter, and by fascism I don't mean people marching, in lockstep. I don't mean everyday oppression and conformity. I mean specific ideas and policy goals that have to do with promoting inequality as a positive good, that has to do with a cult of strength that overlaps with social Darwinism, an anti-communism that sees the destruction of progressive political organizations and the labor movement as a valid goal, because the political ideology does not admit certain oppositional voices as legitimate and therefore wants them silenced. So this is what this alt-right stands for. But the alt-right, the militant right, the Proud Boys and so forth, are not the outliers, the people who just stormed the Capitol. They're not the outliers, they're part of a division of labor within the Republican Party and its political media and business leader subculture. So, and as an academic, as a professor, I knew that these right-wingers look at us as enemies. They look at us as poisoning the minds of the young. You heard Trump give the speech in Mount Rushmore this year, well, in 2020 actually, where he said Marxist professors, teachers, journalists, figures in the media who are responsible for the decline of America. They incite people, they tell people what's wrong with this country, and then what you get is the violence of anarchists and the Black Lives Matter protesters who have no respect, who've never earned anything in their lives, who have no respect for property and freedom, and all they know is what to do is how to smash stuff up. Where do they get this idea? From the Marxist professor. So that is based on a long-standing anti-intellectualism, the idea that you just cannot have people develop a critical perspective on things that exist, on the power structure, and on the ideas that the right wing promotes. So, therefore,
how far does that go back in time?
Probably to Aristotle, but more recently, the newest wave of McCarthyism is or possibly Socrates. Don't quote me on that. The most recent McCarthyism in 2016, I think, is when Turning Point USA first got really into the money. This youth organization that has become the Hitler Youth for Trump. And they have what they call the professor watch list, where they basically keep a list of people online that is growing, that they're saying, these are dangerous leftists who are in the academy. So I have earned my spot in that by criticizing the fascists on Twitter. And then the far-right media sphere, Tucker Carlson's website, Breitbart, etc., took and processed certain of my tweets, scandalized them, one in which I predicted that in order to save democracy, Trump would have to be persecuted, and executed for his crimes against humanity. Distilled that, distilled that down to a narrative that here you have a Marxist professor inciting violence. Now, I'm perhaps one of the few people who have it on the direct authority of the Secret Service who investigated me, that did not threaten or incite violence. So that question has been settled. The propaganda was clear. Now, on the subject of Joseph Castro, and by the way, I do know that my tweets, I have like 50 followers, my tweets were reported to a professor denunciation hotline operated by Tucker Carlson's webpage. There, then further investigated by a guy who had interned with Milo Yiannopoulos, and that made it into Breitbart and so forth. And then you get, then the death threat machine is unleashed. So the moment that Tucker Carlson's website ran the story, Breitbart picked it up, and it was like a prairie fire, and I had 2,000 death threats in my inbox.
Wow.
Now, who reported that? I don't know. What I do know is, however, that I had an altercation in January of 2017 with a local conservative leader in Fresno who had demanded the firing of my colleagues who had published an op-ed in the Fresno Bee in December 2016 saying that the Charleston shooter who had killed people in that black church in Charleston belonged into the same political framework as President Trump. So Michael Emanuel complained to Joseph Castro, tweeted at Joseph Castro, I want these people fired. I called him out on that. I talked back to him. And he was pretty pissed off about that. So one cannot prove who exactly denounced me, but I am aware that there are people in Fresno who have long targeted and singled out professors and loudly demanded they be fired. And that had the sympathy of Joseph Castro. And in my particular case, when the right-wing propagandasphere slandered me and painted me as a violent, dangerous person, Castro echoed that language exactly, issued a press release where he fully got behind that language and these accusations, including being the one who called the Secret Service. On the Monday,
so Castro lifted the mantle, the mantle of the fascists, and reported you to the Secret Service himself.
Or his,
The Secret Service
on his
found
orders.
you not guilty of.
And the Secret Service interviewed me and about 24 people who knew me at length. And while the Secret Service doesn't come around and say, we found you not guilty, what they tell you is if you don't hear back from us, if we don't come to pick you up, you know we haven't found you guilty of anything.
Yeah.
So that's how
you're
that
obviously free.
Yes.
You're not in an undisclosed location. So
No,
clearly they found you not necessary to be taken off the streets.
No. And I mean,
has Castro ever apologized for?
Oh, no, of course not. He has justified, like when a journalist asked him about it, he said that I was an example of what the limits are of freedom of speech and that I had crossed those. That was the implication.
Just not to the Secret Service, just to Castro.
Well, there is a
fascists.
Right. I mean, there's a difference between a death threat and what one may or may not say. But Castro doesn't seem to think that the people who denounced me and that the people who attacked me, which included, local Proud Boys or mutual friend Ben Bergquam, prowled the campus with a camera and produced a video titled The Hunt for Lars Maischak that was during that week. Ray Appleton, who's a radio host in town, on his radio station all day Monday, after Breitbart and the other people reported on me, encouraged people to call into his show and tell him how they wanted me arrested, killed, deported, fired, and so forth. 4 days later, Joseph Castro went on Ray Appleton's show.
He went on Ray Appleton's show? Do you know that Ray Appleton was recently fired for inciting?
I know.
Yeah.
I know. He went on Ray Appleton's show, a fact that his press department included in a list of things to show the public how responsibly Castro handled my scandal. And they said he went on Ray Appleton's show to apologize and explain to the community. So rather than go there and say, how dare you incite violence against a faculty member based on fabrications, he went there and validated further.
Yeah.
During that same week, Zelensky, the provost, and I had a telephone conversation where I said, what are you going to do? Because it was during the spring break. When I get back from spring break, what are you going to do to ensure my safety? Because I have all these death threats against me. Zelensky said, I was hoping that you would respond to those death threats by tendering your voluntary resignation. In other words, you don't like getting killed, why don't you quit your job? She repeated that in front of witnesses. Rudy Sanchez, who was the head of human resources for faculty at the time, was there both times she said this.
Go beg the Nazis for mercy, basically.
Yeah,
and go beg the Nazis for mercy.
But look, I mean, all the same, they and the liberal collaborators were saying, what Nazis? You can't call these people Nazis. They're just legitimate conservatives. How dare you be so rude to ask people to kill them? Except I didn't. there were two journalists in town who were decent people. Evan Onstad, who worked for a TV station in town at the time, and David Taub with GV Wire. The Fresno Bee still had this reactionary who has since switched to GV Wire in charge of their opinion section. His take was he had it coming. He should have just kept his mouth shut. So was my union representative, who today is head of the Women's Studies Department at Fresno State, who I asked for help and who published an op-ed in the Fresno Bee saying, this is a case of people saying stuff in private on social media. That happened to be her field of study at the time. She was interested in what free speech and social media. So she made it about my speech. She said, this is something that belongs into this category of people saying objectionable things. And I think she called what I said incitement or inflammatory. So her premise was, it's his own damn fault for saying stupid stuff, but he shouldn't be fired for it because that's the employer should draw a line there. But what she didn't say, and what she should have recognized and called out, is to say you have an organized, systematic, often repeated campaign to target and harass faculty members. There is a death threat machine that Republicans consciously deploy. And I'm not, like, there was a case of a faculty member in Iowa in the 2018 congressional election who liked somebody else's tweet. And the substance of that tweet was a picture of a campaign billboard for the Republican Congressman Fortenberry that had been altered. The A in Fortenberry had been painted over and replaced in the same color with an O, the O of Fortenberry had been replaced with an A, Fartenberry, which is kind of, juvenile.
Fartenberry?
Yeah, the guy's name was Fortenberry, and they made it Fartenberry, and instead of strong values, strong families, it said strong odor. So it was like a juvenile prank. The guy liked
it. Was a meme, right?
Yeah.
It was just a meme.
Yeah, sure. It was just live action meme because it was an actual billboard out there, Yeah. And then somebody took a picture, put it on Twitter, and a faculty member at a local campus of the University of Iowa liked that tweet. And the congresspersons, that Fortenberry guy, his chief of staff, went through the list of people who had liked that tweet. And he pursued that. He found that one of them was a faculty member at the university, called him and berated him for 1 hour on the telephone. In the course of that conversation, said, we have a free speech remedy for people like you. We can put your name out there on the internet, and we can have people call you and tweet at you and so forth. So in other words, he knows it is a tool in their toolbox to incite a death threat.
The alt-right were doxing people before it became known as doxing.
Yeah.
In like 2018. So they were doxing people.
They've been doing that for a while, but here you have somebody who is the chief of staff or the office director for a Republican congressman who's saying, we can do that because I know I can do this. One call, one email to Breitbart, and you will have to flee your home. And you will have to seek police protection. And they went through political.
They were making terrorist threats against you, and against these people, basically.
Yeah, and it's the same kind of mechanism, It's a way of terrorizing people. So Castro supported that, not just in my case. He encouraged it. He repeated and validated the false, bad faith complaints about me as some kind of radical, violent threat. I would never deny that I'm a radical, that I'm a Marxist, Yes, that's probably why I called the fascism in 2016 before anybody else did. But then the union, Diane Blair, who is a communications professor and was president of the union in Fresno at the time were in a position to tell the administration of the university to back off. And they didn't. They gave them a pass when Castro said, well, because of the death threats, because of the threats, we can't let this guy back on campus, so we're going to remove him from teaching. And the union was like, okay, let's do that. And it wasn't an accident, because after 2 years of me trying to get the union to say, what exactly were you thinking here? Why did you not stand up for me? The union then said, in explaining why they killed my grievance, that after 2 years, eventually they actually deigned to file, the director of representation for the statewide union said the university was justified by weighing your interest in teaching against the threats. In other words, if
they negotiated with the alt-right terrorists.
Not just negotiated, they accepted that if you want somebody gone from the classroom, you can make death threats against them, and that's fine.
Yeah,
and your employer needs to
gave in.
Yeah,
they gave
so
in.
this is Diane Blair.
Defense.
She is still a university professor in Fresno. She was the president of the union. She is the main responsible party. And Kathy Sheffield, who is somewhere from the East Bay, who was the director of representation and who told me in a letter the university was justified. They did the right thing. So it was these three women who are liberals, who are good people, who are union members and leaders. Like Diane Blair is now a member of the state board of this union, who have their office doors plastered with little memes about how to empower women and how to fight against sexism and so forth. So they're certainly poster children for American liberalism, for the left liberalism that you would associate with California. Yet they are perfectly fine throwing somebody under the bus who was attacked by fascists, deny that they did it. Like their colleagues, John Boehner, who is now the union president in Fresno, who is a longtime liberal activist. All these people who would see themselves as leftist liberals now go around also saying that I am slandering these people, that I am liable for libel for reminding these people what they did and asking for justice, asking the union to apologize, to expel these people, to hold them accountable. Not only did the union not do that, they then turned around and gave Joseph Castro a pat on the back, calling this literal Nazi collaborator an inspiring choice to lead the entire university system. So this is a breakdown on multiple fronts. It is the university not functioning as it should be, as an institution in a democratic society that stands up against fascist threats. It is the failure of liberalism, the most advanced, radical, feminist, liberal, diversity, neoliberalism, to stand up for people who criticized and called out fascism, and then to turn around and slander people like me for calling them out and saying, you collaborated, you made common cause with the fascists, you let them get away with it. And they stand there and say, whoa, let it go, deal with it your own self, go get a shrink or whatever. How is this our problem? We're good people, you don't criticize good people. So they take this kindergarten stance of saying there's good people and there's bad people, regardless of their action. So this is the scandal. And if it was just me, it would still be a scandal. But it wasn't just me. That same year in 2017, a young clerical fascist provocateur with a camera and a budget was a student at Fresno State and prowled the campus looking to provoke people into reacting to her so that she could get them on camera and then say, oh, they're attacking me. They're taking away my right to free speech. They hate conservatives. They don't like Christians. This is a person who got another professor convicted in court for wiping out chalk slogans she and her associates had written on the sidewalk. Did you hear that story?
I did not.
They had written anti-abortion slogans on the sidewalk at Fresno State. This professor and his class, and he's a public health professor, they came out of the building, they looked at it, they got upset, and he started with his shoe to wipe out some of the chalk. And she was standing there with the camera and a direct connection to a lawyer. And next thing you know, he was in court and convicted of violating her First Amendment rights.
Wow.
Joseph Castro sided with that student who pulled another stunt like that. Again, she spoke at that infamous Trump rally in Florida, where he spoke at this mega church. She's now the leader of a well-funded anti-abortion group in Fresno and in Fresno County.
Mm-hmm.
Two more professors. Sorry, but I mean, there's Wanda Gerard, after whom they came in 2018, after she said something against the recently deceased Barbara Bush. And Dan Cady, who was likewise dragged by Fox and by the Breitbart sphere and whatnot for confronting students who were with Turning Point USA, that little, functional equivalent of the Hitler Youth or the age of who were having a table and provoking. They have these humongous American flags that they with which they stand there. I know.
Get in your face, live stream you to their Nazi followers, and try to bait you and antagonize you by hitting all your.
And with that too, the university sided with the attackers against the faculty member. Joseph Castro did. So consistently, and this goes back many years, there was a far-right guy on the student council in the early teens, 20 teens, who went with his video camera to the professors' offices in the Chicano and Latin.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who went on a McCarthyist fishing expedition, putting in a Freedom of Information request for all syllabi of all humanities professors to look at who's promoting the dangerous and unpatriotic idea that Mexicans are people too, or whatever it was that he was objecting to, Yeah. He was the guy who doxed as a dreamer.
The president of the student union.
Student council. Yeah.
And that technically violated the constitutional, the prohibition of unlawful search and seizure of papers, or lack of, because he used his position as somebody in the student administration office to search through, I think it was Pedro's papers to check his status, which was a violation of constitutional rights, and then said it was justified because he wasn't a citizen, although a lot of the Constitution doesn't label rights towards a citizen specifically. It will periodically say person.
Yeah.
So
the American Constitution is a whole lot more inclusive when it comes to that. There is a distinction between the rights of citizens and the rights of man. And the American Constitution considers most rights, if not all of them, to be rights of man in general, and not limited to just the citizens. So, but who cares? It's a pig thing to do, one way or the other.
Yeah.
He had no business doing that. So this guy,
but it's also illegal, technically.
Sure. It should, as well it should be. There was another public health professor who discussed human sexuality as part of her class, and one right-wing student with ties to conservative bullhorn holders sent a text message to a group of friends saying, "Dude, our professor is showing porn in class." That was processed to denounce this woman as somebody who is violating people's standards of decency and whatnot. So there's a long history of the far right harassing people, targeting people, and so forth. All of that happened under Joseph Castro's watch. And he goes and he talks to the leaders of this Fresno County Republican Party, whose chairman, on the day after the Nazis stormed the Capitol, still stands there, holds a rally and says, yes, there are legitimate concerns about the validity of this election result. So these are people who are reactionaries. These are people who are part of that Republican Party, which is not a legitimate participant in the democratic political process, but who want that democratic political process ended, and who nearly succeeded. Yeah.
Do you think Castro's motivation and people like him is power or the money of the donors?
He, in public, I called him out when he held the faculty forum, so that people could say their thing about Randa Jarrar. I confronted him, and I calmly explained to him what I just told you. I've never held back, and that was after I called him. I so accurately labeled him as the parade marshal for the lynch mob, and I laid it out and I explained it to him. And the faculty and Castro talked back at me, and that went back and forth for about an hour and a half, and it was an eye-opening experience. Mm-hmm. But Castro, who went down the row of people seated there and shook their hands, and then once before he got to me, made no eye contact, didn't shake my hand, and went straight to his spot where he gave it.
Wow, he'd rather shake hands with fascists than with
critics. He can't handle criticism. So the people, it was a hostile crowd, but Castro said, you know what, my job is to make sure that this university is funded. So he essentially thinks, I believe him when he says that is his priority. And he does not think that taking money from these reactionaries is in any way detrimental to the mission of a university as of an institution of higher learning in the democratic.
Especially one that services so many like low-income Hispanic and undocumented students.
Right.
He's basically kowtowing and asking for forgiveness from racist, fascist bigots. Yeah. In order to secure funding, rather than upholding the actual values of a university and the academia.
I think that these are not considered by anyone, but a handful of fossils like me values a university represents. Like when I published a paper in a semi-public spot, invited several people to comment on it, but I consider to be the duties of the academy, which is to essentially push the limits of what you can debate and have an open debate and an honest debate that makes people in power uncomfortable and that empowers people to democratically manage their own affairs and promote equality and so forth. Many people were saying, why? Why should that be the job of a university? So there is no democratic tradition in academia. There is no sense that you have a job to do in pushing limits, in inciting rebellion, in making the powerful uncomfortable. It is rather seeing the university as a pipeline to feed slightly better educated wage workers into the middle management positions or into leadership.
That's interesting because I could see that with the Ivy Tower, the Ivy League ones, but you would think that some Cal State universities would understand that their demographic is far different. But instead they aspire to be as close to those elitist Ivy Leagues as possible instead of empowering their student body, aspiring towards Ivy League status, even though there's no justice in the Ivy League elite. It's the status quo.
I don't know if they're under many delusions as to what the students they train are going to go on to do. I think they're not going to be running multinational corporations. Good for them if they do, but I think that is the aspiration. That is the maximum of the aspiration. They might want to diversify the ranks of middle management and upper management. But they're not questioning the validity or the usefulness of having middle and upper management to begin with.
I think that the administration is hoping that their administration can aspire to Ivy League status on the backs of their working class students.
Possibly, and I mean, they get paid enough, but if they really think, I mean, the ludicrous slogan that some corporate consultants came up with for Fresno State, discovery, diversity, distinction. I mean, distinction is such a lower middle class slime trail term for we're going to make it, we're going to break into the ranks of people who recognize us as lower of social status than themselves from miles away. So it was painful to see that as the slogan. They should have just gone with something like good enough for people like you,
You'll be able to tolerate us when the university is done with us.
No, but see, I think the problem is that somebody was saying, what do university professors really do when they're not standing around promoting themselves and painting themselves in these colors of rebellion? Like John Boehner, for instance, who I mentioned, who's the leader of the union here, who knows what the union did, who has ignored me and my attempts to get that taken care of and to get that acknowledged, and who is spouting ideas of justice, inclusion. They're not really self-respecting intellectuals. They are, for the most part, resigned to the drudgery, to the grunt work of this neoliberal workplace. They are good participants. They are good constructive players in this system. They dot the I's and cross the T's. With all that stuff, year by year, that gets added to the workload, that has nothing to do with the life of the mind and everything to do with satisfying corporate lawyers, accountants, and so forth. So the university has been gutted as a place of intellectual activity. And the people who are inhabiting it in the leadership positions are not really self-respecting intellectuals. They don't believe that they have a duty to speak out and give people direction. They think that their job is to be constructive critics, but that's about it, if that. Like the kind of stuff.
The veil of polite society again.
Oh, yeah, they're all about that. I mean, definitely there's lots of veils. There's never an honest word. And I'm sorry, I sound like somebody who's just like pissed off about his workplace, but my workplace happens to be one of those fabled institutions that have bred revolutions in the past and that have had people in them who spoke out and came up with important ideas. So I am committed to that role for the academy. I do think if people say that I'm poisoning the minds of the young with Marxist ideas, I would say, I hope so, That's the least that people can expect of me. But I think I'm more or less the only one. Everybody else is just happy to collect their paycheck and go on with their lives and don't like the boat to be rocked. But
yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Don't rock the boat. Let us get from point A to point B. And us specifically in the boat. And right. I remember you saying that what triggered one of those tweets was the imprisonment of children in ICE camps. Yeah. And it was, in a way, it was using your position to stand up for those with none.
Yeah, of course. What else would I do? I mean, in that situation,
And they use their position to tell you to shut up, pretty much.
Oh, no, I mean, that has been consistent. Like Meta Schettler, who I mentioned, that professor who was the author of a ludicrously diaper-soft statement in support of Black Lives Matter that I commented on because I thought it was one of the most ludicrously and diaper-soft statements imaginable.
What was ludicrous about it specifically?
Ludicrous about
was it one of those pro-cop ones? Like we need to meet in the middle with the police or something like that?
It was, the substance of it was that if you want to fix this, give more money to ethnic studies. That was the only substance. Everything else was bluster and blah, blah. What you could have done, if you really want to get into the whole, incarceration, policing, and race business, you could maybe have talked about the fact that we have a criminology department at Fresno State, that there's a pipeline straight to the prison industrial and complex and to the police departments from Fresno State.
The curriculum, change the culture inside of the criminology department.
Criminology is some science. I mean, if you look at the origins of it, it is part and parcel of development of racial ideology. It's like the calipers that they put to people's skulls to find out which way to send them at the ramp in the concentration camp is a tool of criminology. Some of the people who are inspirations to folks like Stephen Bannon, that ghoul, he's well read in theory, like fascist theorists who inspired Mussolini and who were like big in Italy, are some of the ones who invented the tools, the terminology of criminology as a racial study. Like you can peg somebody as criminal by the way their eyes look shifty or the nose is tilted just this way and whatnot. So in my view, that is not much of a science. It should not be just as much. It's as much of a science as theology and as piece of paper talked about was ethnic studies and funding for ethnic studies, as if that made a difference.
That doesn't make any sense.
It makes sense. It makes sense. You have to consider that it makes sense in the minds of these people. So that is the malaise of liberalism. It is the failure of liberalism. And you were saying capitalism, and yet it's right. I mean, ultimately, what is wrong with these people is not that they're bad people, because everybody, whenever I criticize these folks and I point out to others who know them, this is what they did. I believe they must be held accountable. They threw me under the bus. They helped Castro do the bidding of the fascists. People will say, but they're good people, but we're friends with them, but they do so many good things. They want the right stuff. So, and they do. They're not evil. They're certainly, like I said, whatever space on Diane Blair's office door is available is plastered with pro-feminist platitudes and little inspirational memes. But what they don't have is a critique.
From the practice.
Yeah.
They're obviously not doing the practice.
In their mind, they're doing the right thing, and critics from the left are, by virtue of criticizing them, who are the ones who are doing the right things, the critics from the left must be doing the bidding of those who don't want gender equality, who don't want racial equality. So for them, for me to criticize them, it is so easy for them to close ranks, point at me and say, look at this white man who can't deal with strong women, who hates black people, never mind that it doesn't make any sense, but it is definitely the immediate reaction. So that is where the failure of liberalism manifests itself. They think in these categories, in only these categories, and they can't think about capital.
Regardless of what their background is, they're still shaking hands with fascists.
Yeah. And they don't see that as a problem. They don't see that as a contradiction.
These are the marketplace of ideas type people.
Possibly, but if you don't find anything wrong with Joseph Castro's conduct in enabling, encouraging, and amplifying the far right slander, the McCarthyism of encouraging violent provocateurs, harassing his own faculty members, and encouraging right-wing news sources like that Appleton dude and Ben Bergquam to slander and harass and vilify his own faculty. If you don't think that's a problem for somebody who is in a position of power, there's something wrong with your politics. And if you're a liberal, if you're a democratic socialist, whatever else you call yourself, something's missing.
the irony of the term the marketplace of ideas is that it's an oxymoron in what it is it's an abstract kind of art debate when there should be no debate, and when it has never been an abstraction to people, and yet people, regardless of their backgrounds, treat it as though it's an argument that should be discussed, and two, it's an abstraction, which it's not. People die in ice camps, you know, and they're saying, come to the table. You're not negotiating with the other side like we should be, and yet they're abstracting the threat as though it's not a very imminent threat.
Besides, I don't even know if it's a full commitment to a marketplace of ideas, because, like you were saying, they have no difficulty telling me to shut up. Oh, that's why I brought up Shetler in the first place. She basically, in a public meeting, in so many words, told me that. But rather, you know, they do find that leftist voices can be excluded from that marketplace, while they insist on including the right-wing voices that actually want to toss out half the wares that are sitting in that marketplace and that are coming to the marketplace with tainted products.
That's the irony, is there's no original ideas. It's just a regurgitation of conservative / neoliberal neoliberalism. Right. But I say it kind of with contempt, because I've always had contempt for the idea of the marketplace of ideas, since it's basically a negotiating table for Nazis, as I see it.
At this point, yes. If you have that sort of the paradox of tolerance, you know, if you tolerate everything and anything and anybody, then you're going to see that liberal public sphere annihilated by an excess of tolerance.